Hello, and welcome to the Scriptures Are Real podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about elements of the Scriptures that have become real to us because we believe that helps us draw more power into our lives, and we need that power. I'm your host, Kerry and Julianne, and I have with me, I think it's safe to say, my very favorite guest. I think this is her third time on the podcast, and I'm sure not the last, but my very favorite guest. This is my wife, Julianne. Hi, Julianne.
Hi, Kerry.
Yeah. This is one of the few where we just get to stand here together instead of two different people on two different computers or anything else. So anyway, it's good to have Julianne with us, and we've introduced her in a number of other podcasts. But anything you'd like to tell them about yourself?
I'm happy to be here with you, and hopefully we can enjoy our time together.
Many people may not know we actually met at the study abroad in Jerusalem. Of course, Julianne's been back there several times with me and leads tours there and all sorts of stuff. But mostly, she keeps me in line. That's
my job. That's
the hardest
constant
job.
role.
Yeah, the hardest job she has, and also tries to help me wear clothes that coordinate. But anyway, all right. So we're going to talk about Daniel today. So why don't you just tell us, Julianne, some of the things that have been on your mind about Daniel? We've done one podcast episode with Lamar on this. Then Julianne, I felt like had lots of great things to add. And so let's talk about whatever you'd like to talk about.
All right. Well, I've already listened to that podcast with Lamar and Kerry, and I think that they did a great job laying things out with the historical content and all laying out the whole book of Daniel. And before we get started, speaking of the Jerusalem Center, one of these times that we were at the Jerusalem Center with students, they came up with this really creative name for they have this place where the students meet and have this little snack area, and they always come up with creative names. But this particular one fits this book of scripture, and they called it Snack Shack, Me Snack, and To Bed I Go. Pretty clever.
Yeah. Yep. That is a good one. Anyway, all right.
So taking a look at Daniel here, something that really stood out to me with Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is their desire to really be consecrated in their efforts, really be valiant. And that takes a mindset and a determination to do so. In fact, in the Daniel 1, verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat. So this really stood out to me because this is how we can all level up, right? Is thinking ahead of time, right? Living with intention, living a valiant life, being valiant covenant keepers, right? Being covenant living in how we do things. And that takes a mindset of thinking about it ahead of time and being determined to stick to it in very difficult circumstances. He was in a situation where he would easily be able to think he couldn't control his food. The Lord would surely understand, right? And make justifications. But he had purpose in his heart that he would not defile himself, that he would stay true to his covenants that he had made. And you see this just as the beginning, as this book opens, the strength that sets up for the entire book. Don't you think?
I absolutely agree. And I think that intentionality that Julianne talks about that a bit and makes some real efforts for that in her life, to be intentional in following the Lord and drawing closer to the Lord and serving others rather than there is something we all have to be flexible and take things as they come. But being intentional about it is a really important thing to say, okay, here is what I can do and how I will do it.
Right. And in all things, the only way we can know if we're on the right path is to keep the Spirit with us. And the Spirit will help us know how to act, right? And when to choose to not be acted upon about the things that are going around us, and when we need to stand up. And it's hard to always know, but when we have the Spirit can help us know those times and those ways. And Daniel certainly knew here, and it made a big difference. It changed the course of his life. It put him in a position of standing out in a way that he continued to be able to share the gospel and be able to stand up for other Jews and be able to stand up for helping others see God for who he is throughout the whole book of Daniel.
I love that thought of acting rather than being acted upon, right? I know so often I'm just reacting to everything going on around me, but hopefully, and we'll have to do that, but hopefully we've thought through, these are the things that are important to me. Here are the things I'm going to do about it. And then that is part of what every reaction is ensconced within that plan.
Right. Well, and I think really a key component of intentional living is starting out each day with a mindset of drawing close to the Lord. And so with prayer and scripture and really kind of setting our intention that is our priority, and bringing the Spirit in the very beginning of each day into our life, so that when that sets intentional living, right? It just sets our priorities. It sets our mind for the rest of the day. And as we establish those daily habits, right? The daily habits determine our destiny. And then that's intentional living right there, right? It just sets it all up.
Sounded like President Monson.
Well, I was. I was trying to. Okay. And another thing that I think is really prevalent through all of the Old Testament, and then you see it again here in the book of Daniel, is this message of hope. And it's a strong and powerful message that really can go from a feeling of there is no way to get out of this moment, right? This is such a terrible situation and all is lost, right? That's how we can see a situation for sure. And we see it again and again in the Old Testament. And here again in Daniel, you see these moments. You have where Daniel is being told that all the wise men are going to be slain, right? And the decision has already been made by the king. It's done. And in that moment, it seems like all is lost, right? There's no hope. But again and again, the Lord shows us that he is in charge. He has all power and all strength, and does a 180 change here Daniel goes with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And to me, they clearly communed together and prayed together, right? Then Daniel went to his house and he talked to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his companions. In the scriptures, they're using their Hebrew names, but and they would desire the mercies of God of heaven concerning this secret, so to learn the dream. And God reveals it to them, and then they go and share the dream with the king. And it's not just, okay, now you're not going to be slain, right? So then in verse 48, he says, after Daniel reveals the secret to the king, then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon. And in 49, then Daniel requested the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So Daniel's continually also trying to work, I think, here to build the kingdom, right? To put in others in a position of strength also, so that he is furthering this work and having more influence in the affairs of the kingdom. So such a change from, being put to death to being put in charge, right? Yeah. You just can't even foresee that that's going to be the result.
Besides the verses you read, if we read verse 47, the one right before 48, it turns out, the king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. So we'll come back to that idea later, what the king's reactions are in these different times. But it's both an effect on the king and on Daniel and his friends' opportunities to be a force for good. When, as you said, when there was no hope, and then suddenly it works out better. It reminds me of President Benson, who said, men and women who turn their lives over to Christ will find that he can make much more of their lives than they can, right? That's what happened here.
Right. Absolutely. But yet sometimes we waver. and we think, we lean onto our own understanding, and we get scared and maybe even misstep because we lose our faith that we can get out of this okay. But we see that again with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, with the worshiping the idol, and they refuse to do so, and they're brought to Nebuchadnezzar, and he talks with them about it, and they say, well, God will deliver us, but if not, right? They have that full faith that they are going to stand with God regardless. And that reminds me of Job. Job says, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. And that's a powerful faith, right? That's real faith. That's not trusting in the Lord if the outcomes are what we want, right? That's just plain trusting in the Lord, right? Just Christ gave us that example, thy will be done. Mary gave us that example. Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. Be it unto me according to thy word. We hear again and again, here am I, send me. Speak, thy servant heareth. We hear these things throughout the scriptures. This really true faith that is whatever the outcome, right? We see that with Alma and Amulek. Whatever the outcome, we are trusting in the Lord. Here, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they continue in that faith, right? And they are going to believe even when they're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace, and they don't know what the outcome will be. They have faith and trust in the Lord himself. And so, but it's exciting to have a story like this where you can see not only their experience, but also, again, the experience of the king's faith being built and his understanding of who God is. And again, he says in verse 29, he says, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort, right? So just really helping him come to that understanding that while he is a polytheistic believer, I guess is how you say it, which is very confusing. We'll talk about that in a minute, but here it is, he's realizing that none of these other gods that he's believing in can deliver after this sort. And so again, here he promotes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into higher positions of authority, and they all are continuing to be able to build the kingdom as they continue to trust in God, and he delivers again and again.
Good. And I think I love this idea you're bringing up, the trusting in what God is doing rather than the outcomes, right? And that's difficult, and we're all going to have times where we have to work our way through that. And we've just recently seen that even as we were going through Jeremiah. There were times where Jeremiah expected an outcome, or at least the lack of certain outcomes. He expected it not to be this hard. He expected it not to go this way. And that's not how it went. And it took Jeremiah aback, and it was hard. But then Jeremiah persevered through anyway. And that's a great model for us, because I think that we'll often say, wait, I thought it was going to be this way. I was doing this because I thought it's how it was going to go. And then we have to say, okay, well, it's not. So what is going to happen? How is this going to work out? I can't remember who, but someone in this last conference used a metaphor that I really liked, where he said, when you go on trips, you often have layovers. And God's answers to prayers are often like layovers, right? He sent you here, but it's not so you could get there. That's where you're going to hang out for a while before he sends you somewhere else, right? And I think that's a great metaphor, and we see that. Thank goodness Mormon and Moroni have this perspective where, and I think that it probably took them a little while to get there. And I think Mormon's helping Moroni to get there, to say, you know what, our outcomes are not going to be what we want, but we still have to engage in the process.
And Abinadi, right?
Yeah.
It's throughout the scriptures that we have to see this realization that we have to trust in the Lord and his plan. And it's hard to know what that plan is. So we just have to move forward in faith, and not in a certain aspect that we think will be, if we do this, then we get this, right? And we get stuck in that. Or sometimes, and we both had this experience where we feel like we've had answers for a certain outcome, right? That this is the path we're on, and we have in our mind, it's this ending outcome, right? So for myself, I had this really strong desire, and I felt prompted that I should prepare and go on a mission. And so my feeling was that my outcome would be, I would go on a mission in my youth. And instead, I married this man. And it was a little confusing for a little while because I felt like I had already gotten answers to go on a mission. And so shouldn't that be what I was doing? But all that preparation that the Lord had put me through actually put me ready for a turning point, to be ready to join with him and God in a marriage and a covenant marriage, and move forward in a better trajectory in my life. So I think
it was probably also partially for me. I think if you hadn't been about to go on a mission, I would have gotten around to proposing 3 or 4 or 9 years later. So I think that was probably to help both of us.
Yeah, probably. There's probably a lot of things involved, right? Not just 1 or 2 things, and probably a lot of things that we aren't even aware of at this point. But often we have paths that turn out a lot differently and a lot better for us, because when we let the Lord be in charge, it's always better. And we see this again with Daniel in the lion's den, right? He's not going to fear man, and he's going to kneel down and say his prayers and continue on, again, already having established that intentional living, that valiant covenant keeping, that this is what was of importance to him and what he believed in. And then regardless of the outcome, he was going to do it. And so he gets cast into the lion's den. And
at which point it seems like, again, there's no way out, right?
No way out, right? I would definitely feel like if I was getting thrown into a den of lions, especially ones that have been trained to kill, that would be hungry. They're hungry. That this was the process. I mean, this wasn't just Daniel. This was a process of torture and so that you don't defy the king, right? And so I'm sure he's well aware, as is everyone else, that when you get thrown in a lion's den, that's it, right? You're not coming out. And you see King Darius also very concerned about this, and that it also turns him to God, right? So even in this horrible process, again, this is an experience that is helping someone else strengthen and understand who God is, strengthen his testimony. And so he prays all night. And then Daniel again is saved in a situation that seems impossible, but yet nothing is impossible for God.
Yeah, I love how you've put that. You know, when there is no hope, it turns out there's always hope.
Yeah.
When there's no way out, God finds a way out.
Yeah. But still, but if not,
that's exactly
right. Then we trust in God. So, but he doesn't. I do want to share these 2 quotes. I can't quite recall where I got them from, but Jenna Knopf is, I think, how you say her name. And I think it might have been in something that BYU put out. Anyway, she says, faith isn't really faith if we abandon it every time our expectations aren't fulfilled to exactness. Well said, Jenna. And then she also says, don't let perceived unrewarded efforts or initial letdowns take you off the covenant path. And I think if at any moment that these 4 men would have let their those moments where it looked like there was no way out determine their action, right? That they were acted upon and determined a change in action.
Fair to say, God has abandoned me. I'm going to be thrown in the lion's den. I'm going to be thrown in the fiery furnace. I might as well not do this because God's not coming through for me. Yeah,
it would take them off the covenant path, and surely God would not have come through, right? It would have changed the story. It would have been, it would have been a self-prophecy, really. that they would have taken a different path, and so would the Lord have, right? And so we've got to drive this into our hearts, and I think there will be a lot of things in our lives where, unless we've driven this heart in our hearts, and unless we've determined to live each day intentionally on the covenant path, we will find ourselves on a different trajectory. And, in the next life, as we're watching the video of our lives, or however that's going to work, that will be the moment that we think, oh, why didn't I just stay the course? Why didn't I just trust in the Lord? And I hope we can all have the strength to do so. I hope I can have the strength to do so in those moments. Alma 36:3 says, whosoever shall put their trust in God shall be supported in their trials and their troubles and their afflictions, and shall be lifted up at the last day. And I just want to expound just a little bit past Daniel. We have done that a little bit already, but there's so many moments, and maybe you can start thinking also, but there's so many moments that this is the case, right? We have Adam and Eve right at the beginning in the garden, where they have sinned, and you can feel that moment for them, where they feel like we have blown it.
All is lost.
All is lost. We have done what we were told not to, and we'll take our consequences, but all is lost, right? And then God comes in with his understanding that is so beyond ours, right? I love how you say it, that it would be God would be a great disappointment if really we could understand his mind in our finite minds, that
if he did things in ways that made sense to us, then he's not that much better than us.
Right. But here we see again, he understands things we don't. And Adam and Eve, we saw that, and God's plan from the very beginning is hope-filled. We have the experience of Enoch, where the whole land is so full of sin, and with a lot of consecrated effort, right? A lot of, I'm sure, prayer and intentional effort on Enoch's part. He works with the people, and after years of effort, the city is so righteous. The people that he's been working with are so righteous that they are translated and brought up to heaven. And I mean, that's just such a 180 again. And we just have those experiences throughout all of Scripture, and really heavy in the Old Testament.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about Nebuchadnezzar?
Okay. Yep. Let's talk about Nebuchadnezzar. So one thing I was asking Kerry about is to understand Nebuchadnezzar a little bit more, and if he could give some insight on Nebuchadnezzar. It's interesting to see, we could talk about all the different kings that we see here in Daniel, but and they would be similar, I feel like, in this instance. But taking a look at Nebuchadnezzar in particular, he is polytheistic. And you can see as he goes through these experiences with the Jews, that he's starting to understand a little by little that their God is more powerful and stands out, but yet he continually, I think, melds him in with the rest of the gods he believes in. So, and this keeps affecting him, and it affects the story. And so what kind of insight or what kind of thoughts do you have that you can share with us?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, and even more since you brought it up. I think there are at least two, I'm sure there are more, but at least two lessons we should learn from this. So Nebuchadnezzar is one of the most powerful rulers that the world has had. He built a huge dynasty. It doesn't last that long, or a huge empire, but it doesn't last that long. But it's big and it's glorious in his day, and he is full of himself. And it's heady for him. He's really full of himself. And yet he has these experiences.
Talk about an idol that's So how large is that idol? Like,
I don't remember, but it's a pretty big idol of himself. And so, I mean, he's into this, right? And yet he has some humbling experiences. We don't often talk about chapter 4. I believe it's chapter 4 where he goes insane for a while, and you don't have any record of that in he goes insane for a little while in chapter 4. You don't have record of that in the any other accounts. He is, again, at the end of this, is acknowledging how wonderful and amazing Jehovah is. And I would assume that Daniel's account is true, and that just these incidents where he acknowledges Jehovah end up being little blips in his life rather than something sustained. And I think there are at least 2 things to think of in these regards. Well, 3. So let's deal first of all with what Julianne was talking about, that this is a polytheistic society, right? So when he recognizes that Jehovah is powerful and amazing, that doesn't mean that he stops believing in all of the other gods. Instead, this is just another god in the vast pantheon, and he gives him for a moment some credit for being amazing. And then he's back to doing his normal thing. So those are really two things that happen to us. One, as he has experiences that should really transform him and his worship, instead, he doesn't get rid of the worldly ideas he brought with him as he learns about and from God. And I think we all do that to some degree. We all have experiences with God, but we're so saturated in the ideas the world has given us that it's hard to really adopt what God is trying to get us to adopt, because the world has influenced us so much. I have to think this is a big part of why President Nelson has pled with us: make less time for social and other media and more time for Christ. Make sure that God is prevailing the most in your life, and so on and so on, right? Don't turn to the things of the world for rest and peace and happiness. You've got to get rid of the world. Really, this is our big thing. Get rid of our fallen natures. Get rid of all these ideas of the world. And all of mankind has always been saturated by the ideas of the world. But I think our generation more than any, because we can soak it in from 5,000 different media sources 24/7, right? Even while we're sleeping, if we want, we can have something playing or anything. I mean, we are so saturated, and thus I think we are more like Nebuchadnezzar than we would guess.
Yeah. And I think that's where we need to come back to this idea of intentional living, right? We need to set our intentions like Daniel did. And that if we are not acting, right, if we're not doing those things to set our mind to turn toward God, right, and push out all these other things, we don't set a time aside to do so, where we're prayerful and drawing close to the Spirit and finding answers in the scriptures, then we will get pulled in to, these other things that are so prevalent around us that draw us in quite easily, and we don't even recognize it.
Yeah. I mean, so much of the media has little hidden messages that we don't even realize. Just, I'm really.
Yeah. I like how you admonish the ward. Maybe you've shared this on here before, but to our ward, you shared with them the idea to do one thing different, right? What's one thing you can do to remove from your life, and in the same time do something that draws you closer to God? What can you replace that with that will get you closer to him? And that's kind of what we're looking at even with Nebuchadnezzar, right? Instead of trying to remove other things and just focus on God, right? He just tries to keep them all together.
That's exactly right.
And it creates
doesn't work
confusion for him, right? Like, I don't quite get this, right? And so he keeps fumbling here.
Yeah, I would say if we could do it, I mean, you choose whatever timetable you want, but like if you just once a month, maybe on Fast Sunday, you say, okay, what's the thing I'm going to get rid of? And for me, it's been like things that I once thought were harmless. I'm like, okay, I like all sorts of different kind of entertainment. I'm going to start replacing stuff that is maybe even neutral. I'm going to get rid of some neutral entertainment and replace it with something that's more uplifting. So, instead of listening to this kind of audio book, I'm turning more and more to like Deseret book and Siegel book and audio, but it's just entertaining things, but that are written by members of the church that have some the underlying message is edifying rather than an underlying message is worldly and so on. Whatever it is for you, just once a month, once a week, whatever you do, get rid of one thing and replace it with making more time for Christ is really the idea. The other element of this is really related, which is we often have these big experiences where we want to change, and then we go back to life as normal. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to just, the way we would put it is with Peter, to just go a-fishing, right? He had this incredible experience with Christ. Now Christ is God. I'm going fishing because that's what I did before, right? And that happens all the time. So again, this intentionality and so on. When you have these experiences where you want to change, you have to make plans and make that change stick rather than be short-lived, which is a problem that Nebuchadnezzar has.
Yeah. That's great insight and so applicable to us, right? We all have these experiences where we feel the Spirit and feel that great desire to be born again, right? And to never sin again and never stray from the Lord's will for us. And then, but it has to be constant, right? It has to be consistent, our efforts, or else we find ourselves being pulled. Yeah,
it's good. It's very good. I'd say the last thing is that the book of Daniel, there are plenty of books. Jonah is one, Amos and others, but the book of Daniel, maybe more than any other, shows us that God is the God of the whole world. He cares about everyone, every society, right? We've got two different empires that he's dealing with their leaders and trying to teach them and trying to shape them. He is the God of all things great and small. He's in every detail. I don't know about every detail, but he's in details in every nation, every people, every kindred, every tongue. He is working all throughout the earth to bring about his purposes. And that's a really comforting thing and an important thing to recognize.
Yeah. And again, so much hope, right? And that's so beautiful, right? It's for all people. It's for, in all situations, right? In moments of loss of hope, in for each individual. And there, he's not a respecter of persons. It's all. And what a blessing we have to have this knowledge and this understanding, because it changes everything. If we internalize it as we go out and interact with people, and as we take on the challenges and trials of our life, it is what creates that foundational peace and comfort that we know of this plan, and that it is for everyone that wants to take part, and the love extends to everyone. And we've been talking about this kind of in a general sense, but sometimes when we're looking at people that we love and they've really gone off course, and it does seem like, it's easy to feel like all is lost, right? But yet we see here in the scriptures these moments that feels like all is lost, and yet God shows us all is not lost, and it's a plan of happiness and a plan of hope, and that's real, and the power is real, and I'm so grateful.
Amen.